about 35 minutes or so. Travis Roeder joins us, SicEm365.com football analyst. There's a Ben Sims highlight. I didn't know if that was what Paul was going to play or not. Did they get away from him too much when they did get down inside the red zone, or especially in overtime?
I don't think so, but I think they used him well in that game. And honestly, he blocked really well in the run game. And that run game was working for them there at the end. They just had a few penalties and a holding call that went against them that kind of mucked things up there at the end.
How concerned should fans be that they don't have the horses at the skill positions?
Well, I mean, I think that's a presumptuous question, Paul. I mean, I don't know if they don't have the horses. I think the horses just don't have any experience yet. I really liked what I saw from Squirrel in that game. He only had 3 touches in the first half, and I think it seems very clear that they probably didn't have a pitch count on him in the first half. But because I think he ended up with 17 touches, but only had 3 in the first half. So I think it was kind of very clearly second half of that game, they were like, look, whatever we were trying to do as far as limiting his touches, we got to give him the ball. And I thought he looked really, really, really good. His numbers obviously would have looked even better if that 20-yard run of his was able to stand. That got wiped out by the holding call, which didn't even impact the play. So I know that's running back. Wide receiver is another question. Again, I just think there's not that was a pretty unique environment. Not a ton of snaps. And I think Aranda talked about it in his press conference today about how, there wasn't really one area of the offense. It wasn't just the wide receivers. It was, on one play, it would be Blake Shapen just kind of not seeing the field well. The next play, the protection would break down. And then the next play, it would be a wide receiver at fault. And it doesn't take too many of those instances for the whole offense to kind of get thrown out of whack. So I think it was a kind of a one-game experience. We'll see if they grow from it. We saw how much this team grew throughout last year. Something I've mentioned many times when I've been on here is that college football teams are never the same in September as they are in October. So it's just something to watch. If they still look the same in 2 or 3 weeks from now, that's cause for concern. But at this point, I think you just look for growth.
Travis, you talk about the hyper-focus and the things that come with that. Obviously, after a game like that, Blake Shapen was a target for plenty of people out there and his level of play. What did you see exactly on Saturday night? I mean, BYU deserves a ton of credit. I think we can all say that. But in terms of what they did, what did you see? What do you think he learns from it? And was there anything that lingered with you as a potential concern that could be a concern again moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I try and never mince my words because I think for your, when you're analyzing a player, for your praise to mean anything, you need to also be negative when there's negative out there.
Sure.
And Blake Shapen has certainly earned a ton of praise throughout his Baylor career with what he's done in the few games that he's played. But that was flat out not a good game from him. And I think he would tell you the same thing. It was something I talked about before the season. Whenever you have a first-year starter, you know that you're going to have a couple of clunkers at least. And, you just had to hope that Baylor was able to survive those. Baylor almost was able to survive him playing a poor game. And it wasn't just quite enough. That doesn't mean he was all bad. But I think my mind really kind of goes to a couple of main things. For one, as I mentioned with the passing game as a whole, I think you kind of clearly saw that the moment, I don't want to say it was too big for him, but like, Aranda talked about you being able to see it in players' eyes. And I feel like even from the broadcast, like when they would, zoom in on players' faces and stuff, you could tell the moment was just very, very big for a lot of these guys. Mm-hmm. And whether it was the frustration for not being able to hear the play from the sidelines or get it communicated to his teammates, all that kind of stuff, I think that kind of wore on him. There was also just sporadic protection issues to where it created an issue where, it only takes a few times for the offensive line or the tight ends to bust the protection for you to start, having your mental process sped up even when you don't need to. So I thought that kind of created an issue in that game to where a couple times the protection was bad. And then most of the time the protection was good, but he was kind of acting like, getting out of the pocket or not making his reads properly because his clock was sped up. So that's something I want to see even in this Texas State game. I want to see how he acts in the pocket because I think he needs to get that really good pocket presence that we've seen from him previously back. Because you can't play quarterback if you're kind of looking to escape the pocket and not trusting your protection. So I think that's something they need to refocus on this week, because you're not going to hit big plays downfield unless you trust the system around you to kind of give you time to make the throw.
All right. So, and I read what you put up after the game Saturday, and there's easy this Why aren't they doing this? I asked the question about Ben Sims. I do wonder whether they got away from him, especially whenever they were down in the red zone. But it's a lot easier said than done. And I asked this of Dave Aranda today. Well, why don't they change the game plan? It's not. Yeah. It's really much more difficult than people think. It doesn't mean you can't tweak it, but to change it or whatever in game or even halftime is not. It's not just like real simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps. It helps fans to think about how this process happens, right? So, again, I know a theme that I've hit on many times since I've been on with y'all is the fact that college football is so unique in that coaches have a very limited amount of time with players. And so think about a week of prep for this game. I mean, you've got a couple of full practices throughout the week, and then you usually have like a walkthrough. And then there's meetings, and that's about it. So, I mean, you really basically have 1 or 2 days to kind of prep a game plan, a few days to practice it in practice, and then you have a walkthrough, and then it's game time. And so what that means is, this isn't Madden. There's not just like a 300-page playbook that you can just kind of select any play you want on any different situation. Just to take one example, I mean, you could draw up something, but think about it like this. Be like, okay, the defense is doing this. I want to draw up this special play to take advantage of it. Well, the first thing your kid's going to ask is, well, where do I line up? How many steps do I break off my route? What if the defender does this? Like, what do I do? Think about your playing days for anybody who plays football. It's not, you can't just draw something on a whiteboard and then expect kids to execute it because there's so much minutia and detail that goes into executing these things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's where the difficulty lies. It's one thing to criticize a game plan and say the game plan didn't work. But I think I've seen too much criticism along the lines of, well, they should have just adjusted on the fly. And yes, great coaches are able to adjust, but it's always kind of a tweaking of things. It's never a wholesale change of things mid-game.
Well, Travis, to that point, I mean, if you go back to Baylor versus Texas, 2015, where all the quarterbacks were hurt, they needed to go in the locker room to invent that offense and just run the same 4 plays for the rest of the time. And even then, it wound up not working out for them in the end because they only had a whiteboard and a let's do this to try to make this work.
And really, the only reason they were able to do that is because essentially all they did was run their same schemes, but just didn't even pretend to throw the ball. So it wasn't like they were inventing those running plays. They just told, the guy who got the snap, just run with the ball essentially. So I think that is a great example, Paul, of, they had to get to halftime to teach Corey Coleman how to basically play quarterback, but they weren't pretending to have him read the field throwing the ball. It was just, okay, we're just going to run these same things we always do. We're just going to do this one little tweak, if that makes sense.
Travis, I know we got a lot of BYU fans listening. What's the biggest compliment you can give to them coming out of Saturday night?
Oh, well, I think of 2 main things. First of all, Jaron Hall is a dude. He is. I've seen him mocked in the first round. I was looking at some more mock drafts this morning. He's getting pretty consistently rated around the 2nd or 3rd round. And I think after this year, remember last year was his first year starting. I think after this year, if they go on to have the kind of year, I think they're very much capable of finishing with 1 or fewer losses. He's very much going to be a guy probably won't get drafted above CJ Stroud or something like that, but he is a full on dude. The other thing that impressed me is, ESPN was really hammering home the storyline of how BYU felt kind of, embarrassed physically after last year's game, where Baylor kind of pushed them around. And I think a lot of Baylor people, myself included, took for granted Baylor's ability to control the line of scrimmage in this game. And it was a beautiful reminder of what makes football so great. Football is all about attitude. It's all about culture, and it's all about mindset. Those were the same dudes that got their butt whipped last year in Waco. And they showed up that night and said, we're not going to let that happen again. And it showed. Like, those guys on their defensive front, especially, again, the same guys that got pushed around last year, they were flying around, playing hard, making plays. That linebacker, number 31, Tooley, I believe is his last name, was a stud. I think that's a testament to Scott Frost couldn't do that at Nebraska because he didn't have the culture and the ability to kind of manifest that within a team. So I'd be very happy as a BYU fan with Sitake as my head coach, because I think you're only able to produce that kind of year-over-year change and physicality, mindset, toughness, culture, all that kind of stuff when you've got the right person at the helm of your organization. It was a very impressive performance by them.
Travis, in terms of maybe a player or two, who do you think grows the most from, I mean, Blake Shapen seems like an obvious, but maybe even some guys on defense. Who do you think grows the most from that experience on Saturday night?
Oh, great question. I think Seth Jones is a good one. I think it was a case where, again, we talked about how Baylor needs guys to step up at wide receiver. He played a lot. He made a few good plays, but I also could notice a couple of errors that he made. He's a guy who's physically as talented as it gets, and Baylor's going to lean on him. I mean, they tried to hit him on that first play of the game when Shapen nearly threw an interception on the first play of the game. But he's a guy that comes to mind because they continue to play him a lot, and he's very, very talented. But I think he's one of these guys that, he's a sophomore and basically never played before this year. So I think he's a guy that I want to see grow from this experience. And then, on defense, I think I'd have to go, with that cornerback room in general. Yeah. I think that Loretto Johnson and Mark Milton actually played pretty well. But that kid, Chase Roberts, their wide receiver, was obviously a very good player. And they had a few moments of lapses, and that's really all it takes in a game like that. I thought they played very well, but they're going to need to improve their play by, marginally improve their play throughout the year. And I liked what I saw from them, but that's an area where you could expect to see some improvement and some growth as they gain more experience.
Travis, thank you. Appreciate your time. Travis Roeder writes columns, analyzes football before, during, after games as well.